Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining this webinar. So great. I think we'll get started. So first of all, just thank you for joining the webinar today on the topic of choosing between native and introduced tree species during tree planting. Just to note that the webinar will be recorded so that we can put it online later. If you'd like to, and I can see that people are already doing that, but just please use the chat function in Zoom in this meeting, just to say, who you are, where you're from, and maybe what your interests are, if you want to, connected to trees and tree planting. Um, so I'm just now going to pass over to Alice, who's going to give a few introductory remarks to this webinar. So hi, Alice. Just over to you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alice Mushuge, the theme leader for the C4 aircraft tree theme, which is the dealing with tree diversity and productivity. And one of the projects that I am leading is the right tree for the right place and for the right purpose, which we also call the RTRP seed. And it's about it's a how to deliver better tree planting material to growers. And part of this project, of course, with our colleagues who are partners in this project, the Botanical Garden Conservation International, the Unique Land Use, and the Global Landscape Forum, we have established a platform which we call the Transformative Partnership Platform for Quality Tree Seed and Seedling Delivery, which in short we say it is the Quality Tree TPP, to support the partners in developing policy and practice to support tree planting and to ensure that this tree planting is done in a way to meet the livelihood and environmental demands or goals. And one of such activities within the Quality Tree Seed TPP will be to hold a series of webinars in the related topics. And we opened this series with today's webinar, and it's on the subject, of course, you've all seen the title, Choosing Between Native and Introduced Tree Species During the Tree Planting. I'm going to hand over, of course, to my colleague Ian, who is moderating this session, to tell us more about this webinar and, of course, introduce the speakers. And I thank you all for attending this first series of the seminars, and I'm looking forward to us all learning about this topic together. Thank you.
Hmm.
Over to you.
Thanks, Alice. And so on the topic today of choosing between native and introduced tree species for planting, we have a number of speakers who are going to present the case for investing planting first in native tree species, and then second for introduced, or what we might call also exotic tree species. And we'll start with Paul Smith, who's Secretary General of Botanic Gardens Conservation International, and he'll present the case for native trees. And then after that, Winkei Twanja, who's a botanist who works with the Little Environmental Action Foundation as head of terrestrial restoration on the Kenyan coast. He's going to also speak about native tree species planted in an African context. Then after that, we'll have Chris Harwood, who's formerly of CSIRO in Australia. He's going to present on the case for introduced or exotic tree species planting, focusing on smallholders. And then Chris will be followed by Elizabeth Mungai, who works for Gatsby Africa and will present on some of their work on introduced tree species planting in Africa. Following the presentations, we'll have a Q&A session with the presenters. And the way to ask questions for that part of the webinar will be to put your questions in the chat. So just put your questions in the chat box so you can do that as we go along. And we'll also ask the participants, you as participants, some questions at the right time using an online survey tool. So look out for them as well because they'll inform our discussion. So the webinar will last for an hour initially, but for those who have the time and inclination who would like to, we'll then stay online for an optional additional 30-minute discussion for those who can, where we'll go into things, some of the issues that have been raised in more detail. Um, and in that further discussion, we'll have an open Q&A where we'll just speak to each other directly about the issues, and you can raise questions and comments verbally. But before then, just please keep your microphones on mute so that we don't get interference with the presenters presenting. So as I said, we're going to start with Paul Smith. So I'm going to pass over to Paul on to talk about native tree species planting. And just to mention, Paul, that I'll try to keep you to time. So I'll nudge you if you're going over time, and I'll do the same with the other speakers as well. So over to you, Paul.
Thanks very much, Ian. I'm going to just try and share my screen and hope that works okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My job this morning is to make the case for planting native tree species. And of course, which trees we plant very much depends upon what we're trying to achieve. What is the purpose? If we look at the big issues that humanity faces with relevance to tree planting, there's obviously the loss of biodiversity and the need to restore habitats. There's climate change, both mitigation and adaptation, where trees, as we know, play an important part. And then, of course, there's sustainable livelihoods, improving people's lives, poverty alleviation, and so on, where trees are very much part of people's livelihoods. And I need to say right off that exotic species have their place, and particularly in livelihoods. Farmers want species that are fast growing. They want improved cultivars that will produce straight stems or will grow very quickly. And they want ready markets just like they do for any other crop. So exotic species certainly have their place. But we do have some other challenges and issues. And one of those is the loss of biodiversity, the biodiversity crisis. And the new Global Biodiversity Framework, which came out of the Kunming-Montreal Framework, um, under the Convention on Biological Diversity, has Target 2, which is to restore 30% of all degraded ecosystems. And that means using native species, putting those back. We also have a major challenge, of course, in climate change. And trees are very much part of the picture for climate change mitigation. They absorb carbon. And so we're seeing a lot of programs around the world where trees are being planted to compensate and offset carbon emissions. What this then equates to are some very large pledges related to planting trees. The Bond Challenge and related Africa 100, 350 million hectares by 2030. And it's important to understand that the approach for forest landscape restoration, we also have the Trillion Trees movement, we've got many others coming from corporates and so on, is not necessarily about restoration or ecological restoration in biodiversity terms. It's a flexible, nuanced approach which includes the use of exotic species to meet livelihoods needs. And one of our concerns for those of us who work in biodiversity conservation is that it is exotic species that are overwhelmingly being planted as a response to these pledges. So if you take somewhere like Ethiopia, Ethiopia has committed to restore 22 million hectares of land, of which 15 million is meant to be native species and the rest exotic. But the question is where are those going to come from? So we can get into a situation where we have good intentions and bad outcomes. And that's particularly where I think within the climate change world, where we want to mitigate climate change, we're planting trees, which is an excellent thing to do. But there is always the danger that we may damage or displace biodiversity. And it's not always the best outcome for CO2 emissions either. Part of this is to do with markets, which I mentioned earlier. Exotic trees, they're easier to source, they're cheaper. You can get them in larger numbers, so it's about availability. Now, ironically, at the same time, we have an extinction crisis for the world's tree species. There are around 58,000 tree species in the world. My organization, BGCI, has led the global tree assessment over the last 10 years. And the results of that are showing that around 17,500 tree species are threatened with extinction. We have nearly 3,000 that are critically endangered, and around 600 with fewer than 50 individuals left. So there's an irony here that everyone wants to plant trees, but not these trees. And these trees have important roles to play within their own ecosystems, as I will describe. So what are the risks of planting exotic species in the wrong place? Well, one is that your whole project may fail because soil or climate or whatever is not right. There's an example here from Dubai, planting Washingtonia, where no matter how much you irrigate, it's just too hot for Washingtonia. So, of course, the trees are going to die. But what I'm mainly concerned about in this talk is inadvertently displacing native biodiversity. And we see that with some of the perverse incentives related to climate change, where people are rewarded and paid for the trees they plant, not necessarily the trees that they nurture and protect. And we've seen this in many cases. You may also inadvertently plant an invasive species, species that are detrimental to ecosystem services like water and so on. Susceptibility to fire is a big one, particularly for the resinous exotics, the eucalypts and the pine species. You plant a large monoculture, and as we've seen in places like Portugal and California, that can create challenges. And then certainly in the north, I would say excluding local communities from value chains. Here where I am in Wales, contractors come in, they plant clone trees with machines, they leave them for 30 years and then they're harvested with machines. There's nothing for the local community in terms of maintaining or managing those trees. So what are the constraints to native tree species planting? The most important constraint is limited demand. And of course, farmers want fast-growing exotics and multi-purpose native species, but governments have committed to restore habitats. So there should be demand, and that demand should be really instigated by governments. But we've not seen that since these big pledges have been made. Yes, there are technical constraints, mother trees getting hard to find, poor seed collecting and processing techniques, lack of knowledge, and so on. But we can overcome these. The world's botanic gardens and arboretum grow at least 20,000 different tree species. We know how to grow plants, and those are surmountable. The market thing is more difficult. So, what are the opportunities? Well, one opportunity is the fact that many native tree species are also useful. We've got this wonderful database produced by Roland Kint and the ICRAF team showing that we have 14,000 tree species they list there on that database, which are also useful to people and to livestock. So there are win-wins where we can plant native species, good for biodiversity, but also good for people. We also have lots of guidance now on how to restore habitats. We have governments now developing their national biodiversity strategies and action plans, which will include pledges to restore that 30% of degraded ecosystems. And governments are also increasingly seeking accountability from corporates and others related to their biodiversity footprint, and trying to ensure that that is compensated for. So, in conclusion, if your purpose is to enhance biodiversity, is to restore habitats, recover species, then it is native species that you need to use, and there are many additional benefits. They're good for ecosystem services, and when we talk about biodiversity, it's not just the tree species. It's the millions of other species that rely on those trees in their life cycles, the mammals, the birds, the insects, the fungi, the lichen, and so on. So you plant a native tree species, there's a massive knock-on for thousands of other species. And that is where I will leave it. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. That's great. We'll go straight on to Winkate, who's also going to present on native trees. And just remember that as we go along, if you have any questions for the speakers, put them in the chat, and then we'll have the Q&A session for everyone together after the speakers. So over to you, Winkate.
Thank you. My name is Winkate. I work with the LEAF charity. Next. LEAF is a charity that works on forest landscape restoration, and we focus on planting native tree species for biodiversity, ecosystem services, and livelihood. We work with universities, local communities, and conservation partners all over the world with a strong emphasis on systems and long-term sustainability. Next. So in Kenya, we have what we call the Pwani Project, which has 4 major components. That is our indigenous tree nursery, what we call the relics and restoration sites, an outreach program, and mangrove restoration. Next slide. Pwani University in Kilifi hosts our ex situ restoration plots, which serve as a haven for species that will become future seed sources. Over the years, we've been planting trees that are native to the East African coastal forest with species that get to over 200 species. And because of projects that we partnered with BGCI, Kaya Connect, in a project funded by the Foundation Franklinia, we planted over 60,000 tree species in the ex situ restoration plots and in situ relic sites as well. Next slide. So the relic sites are biodiverse fragments of forests that are at the heart of the community and are at the verge of extinction. They are homes to threatened and endemic species, which are often cut and used as firewood by locals who are unaware of their importance. So we reach out to these communities and we work closely with them to help restore these biological relics by educating them and engaging them in tree planting. We also provide alternative means of livelihoods for the community that use these relic sites. Some of the sites that we work with at the Kenyan coast are like Mwangea Hills, which is a water tower, Pangani, Chasemba, Makula, Panga site in Nyeri. Most of them are limestone outcrops. Okay, so why does LEAF focus on native tree species? First, these native species underpin the local biodiversity and ecosystem functioning, and most of the importance has been mentioned by Paul in the previous presentation, and they are better adapted to the local climate. And especially for the coast, native species are very important culturally and ecologically to this landscape, and they reduce the risk linked by invasive species or the invasive behavior of some introduced species like Lucina or the neem. Next slide. Yeah, so some of the key impacts we have had over the years through the planting of native tree species is we have had many red listed species conserved, species like Vitex keniensis and Gigasyphon, which no longer is found in Kilifi. So we have them introduced into the wild. There's ecosystem resilience. We have seed systems that are locally adapted being established. And then there's the spread of knowledge, not only of propagation, but bringing back the knowledge of the native species and the importance to the community. And the most important of all, which lies in my heart is improving the livelihoods of the community, because they are the ones who are the caretakers of this resource, and improving their livelihood means that they can take care of this natural resource even better. We have alternative means of livelihood, such as indigenous tree nurseries, and we also provide employment for the local community in different aspects, like in our outreach programs or the nurseries, our restoration sites. Yeah, so over the years, we've seen a huge difference in terms of how the community embraces the native trees, and they've seen the importance as compared to the counterparts, which are exotics. And we've seen a difference even in the landscapes that we've been working with. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Wingate, for also presenting the case for native tree species planting. That's great. Thanks for keeping to time, Paul and Wingate. So we're now going to pass over to Chris, who's going to present the case for introduced or native, or exotic tree species planting. So over to you, Chris, and go ahead.
Yes.
We can, Chris. Yeah, we hear you well.
Right, so there's my first slide. I've titled my talk, "The Smallholder Commercial Timber Tree Growing, the Smallholder Experience." I guess I'm trying to show how, in my experience, the way that smallholders grow trees to produce commercial timber is very different from ecosystem restoration, and understanding how where situations where smallholders have taken up tree planting on a big scale can help us in our decisions about exotic or indigenous. In my view, most countries need both. So in my next slide, I've referred to a terrific paper by, next slide please, a terrific paper by Neil Byron. Oh, sorry, the first one here is just to draw this distinction between growing trees for farmer livelihoods, where farmers grow trees on their own land or land that they securely manage, and they plan to harvest saleable forest products or timber, and they want to help make a living, send their kids to school and so on, and earn a livelihood. And the trees have to pay their way, if you will. That's entirely different from tree planting as part of natural ecosystem restoration, and where there isn't an expectation that product harvests will pay for tree establishment and management. So I'm looking at growing trees for commercial timber. Next slide, please. So Neil Byron in 2001 wrote a terrific paper that I've referenced there, Keys to Smallholder Forestry, and he posited that there are 4 keys to unlock the door to successful tree growing on smallholder farms: clear and unequivocal ownership of the land and the trees, attractive and reliable markets for the forest products, a good technical package of practices which minimises risk to the grower, and a sympathetic legal and regulatory framework. And as I've worked over decades in different countries, I've seen cases where these 4 keys have lined up in countries such as Vietnam and Thailand, and you've got terrific uptake of timber tree growing by smallholders, and other countries, for example, Laos, where land ownership is still highly disputed, where there's been minimal smallholder uptake to date. So let's look at slide 4, which is a table I made up. These are not official FAO figures, but they're my estimates of the total area of smallholder plantations in different countries. It's the area of these species in the countries is even larger. For example, Vietnam has about 2.3 million hectares of acacia plantations, and about 70% of those, or 1.6 million hectares, are managed by smallholders. Now we look down the list here, and most of these species seem to be exotic, don't they? You could look at Paulownia in China as a indigenous species, but I haven't been to see those plantings, so I won't talk about that. But notice that Smallholders don't plant trees and walk away. They cut them down on short rotations, generally less than 10 years, and they're cutting down trees of small diameter, often only 10 centimetres diameter, and off they go to some sort of factory. In these big areas of plantings, you can see about half of them are seed-based and half are clonal, and some of them are hybrids which have been developed through research, as we'll discuss. So slide 5 summarises some characteristics that seem to me to be common across all these examples. There has to be strong commercial demand for the timber that the smallholders grow. They choose easy to grow, fast-growing species, and mostly these are exotics, but not always. Either the public sector, government agencies, or the private sector, like forestry companies, have provided what I call a robust technical package, including improved germplasm, silvicultural techniques, and advice to small growers. The short rotations give quick returns and flexibility to change for tree species each cycle, or change back to another land use. They might decide to grow pineapples after a rotation of eucalypts or acacias or casuarinas. You'll often hear the phrase low-value exotic monocultures. Well, they're not low value to the smallholders because they get money after 5 or 10 years, which they can put to improving their family's livelihood. Changing the planting species is quite often seen as new species emerge, or they might have to change because the species gets whacked by a disease, or maybe the climate's starting to change. Let's look at the next slide. This is about these technical packages that have been developed for these widely planted timber species. And on the right-hand side of the slide, we can see a set of climate conditions under which the Eucalyptus dunnii can grow. That's a subtropical species that grows in warm, temperate subtropical climates. It can tolerate some frost. It won't grow in fully tropical areas, so you can map out the areas where it would grow in China or Africa or South America, and that will help with matching. And it's quite... This information is available for all of these widely planted timber species, but it doesn't prevent poor species site matching and poor planting choices, which continue to this day. So small growers and large growers need disinterested science-based advice when they choose which timber species to grow. A lot of effort has also gone into developing packages for indigenous species. I can remember in the 1980s seeing work that ICRAF was doing to develop Markhamia lutea in Kenya, but as far as I know, no large planting has yet emerged of this species. So doing the work is no guarantee of take-up. All right, let's look at slide 7. I'd just like to emphasise really strongly that there's no such thing as a sustainable species for when you're trying to produce a product. There's sustainable practices. It's no use looking around to find a more sustainable species than eucalyptus or casuarina or grevillea or some other. If you don't manage a stand of fast-growing trees sustainably, then yields will decline and the site will deteriorate. But fortunately, CIFOR supported the study, the network study by Dr. Nambiar and others in the commencing in the 1980s and still running today, which establishes the sort of practices, and you can see some of them there with slides from Vietnam where the harvest residues are left on site after the harvest and they rot down and help to maintain carbon and nitrogen in the soil. And these studies now running up to 4 rotations have shown that with good practice, smallholders can sustain high wood yields over multiple successive rotations. And also that changing to another species is not an indication of failure, it's adaptive management, if you like. So that's an enduring legacy from CIFOR on guidelines for sustainable plantation management. Next slide just shows the converse, unsustainable practices. And here's Dr. Nambiar gesturing at burning on a steep slope with loss of nutrients and carbon down slope, or people think they can control weeds by ploughing the interrows, which is the very first worst thing you can do because you don't get rid of the weeds and you cripple the tree roots, or you dig up the stumps after a rotation. These will definitely lead to declining yields, whether your species you're growing is exotic or indigenous. Okay, next slide. Just want to emphasize that this business of growing commercial trees, the growing has to be linked to wood markets. There's been examples in countries such as the Philippines and India where such species have been promoted without markets, and then there's been huge disappointment. The two slides show stacks of wood being produced in Vietnam from acacia, and stacks of veneer sheets being produced from very small diameter eucalypt billets in China. And I want to emphasize you don't need hundreds of thousands of hectares in the country to start commercial industries which can replace imports or perhaps lead to exports, and which beneficially link urban regions which need commercial wood and rural regions which can produce the wood and provide employment in small factories for thousands, and in cases like Vietnam, or hundreds of thousands of people working in the wood processing industries, and helping wealth to go back out to the rural areas and provide jobs. So
just 1 minute, Chris.
Yeah,
1
right.
minute.
This is my last slide on environmental impacts, and I think we can learn from places where this timber growing has occurred widely. Generally, you see smallholder growing in a mosaic of land uses, and in that situation, timber tree plantings won't have a major effect on water use. And also, it's important, well-managed plantations have high biodiversity in the understory, even if the trees are a monoculture. And we have found that invasiveness is manageable in the context of commercial tree growing. And also, I haven't got time, but plantations can deliver good outcomes because the products go off-site and it's sequestered away from the site, and displacing higher energy things. So there we are. I've got to finish now, and we can deal with these questions more in question time that I've raised. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chris. That's great. And like you said, Chris, we can come back to some of the issues in the Q&A. So just going to hand over now to Elizabeth at Gatsby Africa, who's going to present a little bit more about the case for introduced tree species planting in Africa. So over to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you for that. So as mentioned, my name is Elizabeth Mungai. I work for an organization called Gatsby Africa. Gatsby Africa is a charitable organization. We have offices in the UK, but most of our work is in East Africa, mainly Uganda, Tanzania, and Kenya. For the commercial forestry sector, or rather the program that's most relevant to this webinar, Gatsby Africa has been working in the space for about 20 to 30 years. So we bring a wealth of knowledge when it comes to plantations, trees, and of course, the economic benefits of such practices for farmers, governments, institutions, etc. So today I'll be presenting the case for exotic species, mainly pine and eucalyptus, using the SPGS case study and others. Right, thank you. Next slide.
Next slide. Can we change the slide? That's it.
Yeah, that's the one. Thank you. So just an introduction on the SPGS, not SPGC. SPGS, I guess, a study over in Uganda, or even program. So basically, SPGS stands for Solar Production Grant Scheme. And this was a program run by the government, but very much funded by donor institutions, to sort of increase planting of trees, mainly for the deficit of sawlog trees for processing. So basically, what was observed with this program, and thank you so much for Chris for bringing up the Byron study, was that very similar to the Byron study, farmers were only incentivized to plant if there were conditions met in the program. So I've just highlighted some of these conditions, which is a higher income per hectare. So this is just explaining that compared, I will answer that question very soon. So compared to native species, pine and eucalyptus species have 10 to 15 times higher yields. And what does that mean to the farmer? Basically more income with the assumption. So just again, there could be about 3,000 to 12,000 hectares. The next thing is strong and visible markets. So again, in the program, it was observed that farmers are only incentivized, or rather one of the reasons why farmers were incentivized to plant more was for access to markets and also very much consistent markets that would take or rather buy their products or buy their crops. Again, mainly with pine and eucalyptus, there are multiple markets that these trees can be sold into. Just examples, there are sawmills, poles, veneers, pulp and paper, and these are guaranteed buys as well. The next point is predictable and faster cash flow. So this is just going back to the previous point of 10 to 15 times higher yields. Yes, the tree does grow thick, but at the same time it grows faster. What that means is shorter rotation time. So instead of maybe a mahogany tree being cut down after 20 to 30 years commercially, eucalyptus trees mainly for different markets. So mainly the 5 to 7 years would be probably for the veneer market. So after 5 to 7 years, a farmer can harvest a eucalyptus tree and get money for it. For pine, 10 to 12 years. So these are shorter times for the farmer to earn cash on their land. The next one is risk diversification. So basically what this means is, just going back to the point, there are multiple markets that want or rather demand pine and eucalyptus trees or exotic trees. And basically what that provides the farmer is a choice, right? It provides them not only income, but also choice. And of course, in terms of business, anyone who's doing this commercially is always going to be an advantage if they have choice of markets. So basically, I think the key point I'd like to stress with the SPGS study is of course noted down here, is farmers and private growers are incentivized when tree planting is treated as a viable commercial investment, right? So of course a farmer has limited amount of land and they have to decide what they're going to do with that land. So are they going to plant, or rather what the statement is saying is that they're probably going to plant something or be incentivized to plant something that can give them income. Next slide, please.
So just 1 minute, Elizabeth.
Sure. So just to stress again, they are very much local and global markets ready to take on these exotic species. And just to stress, so in Tanzania, there's about 588,000 hectares available for commercial forestry, and 70% of this is mainly under private growth. So that's the small and medium growers, not necessarily the big private companies that do commercial forestry, but rather I guess you could say common minority. And what I want to stress with this is that there's a high opportunity for these growers to actually earn money from their land, since they're the ones who have most of it and also contribute to the GDP much more than their respective governments, and also, again, as I mentioned, the large private commercial forestry players. Now the second pie chart there is a sample of about 45 processing companies in Uganda that have stated what their intake or demand for roundwood is per annum. So in total, really is about 3.5 cubic meters. So what that could translate to is maybe a tree of about 10 years would maybe be 0.25 cubic meters. So again, a huge opportunity for farmers and economies to just develop and thrive on the commercial forestry sector if done properly. And again, the advantage that comes with exotic species, as you mentioned, pine eucalyptus, really this can really be fueled by those species, and of course, earn not only private growers and governments, but or governments, yes, but economies really higher incomes. Next slide, please.
Okay, I think, Elizabeth, we better pause there if that's okay. And we can come back to this in the discussion if we can. But
Sure.
thank you though, Elizabeth, that's great. So what we'd like to do now, so first of all, thank you very much to all of the presenters, and we hope to come back to some unresolved and unfinished issues in the question and answer session that we have for the next 10 or so minutes. And first of all, what we'd like to do is ask a couple of questions to you as participants. And so we're just going to share a couple of questions on screen that everyone can answer. We'll see what the responses are. So the team are going to do that. Great. Here's the first one coming up.
Yep. So allow me to give a bit of instructions. I put in the chat the link, and you can also scan this with your mobile phone, the QR code, and that would bring you to the space where you can answer this. So right now we can see we have one respondent. So I'll wait a bit before I start showing the results. Don't be shy. We want your inputs. There's 180 people in the room. Let's get at least 100 responses. And that is also addressing the organizers and the speakers. So in a minute, I'll start showing the results as they come in. Right now we have 7 results, 14 people are typing. Okay, so we can start showing these, and you can comment these, Ian.
Yeah, great. So we can see that, at the moment, the purpose of planting is there's a strong emphasis on that. So, purpose and use, economic, we can link to that too. We also have some things that are more environmentally focused. So, let's see, they're moving around quite a lot, but local biodiversity, soil composition, we can think of that as an environmental service. So we're kind of getting a bit more resolution onto kind of purpose and biodiversity. So I think that probably shows the composition of the participants who are in the meeting, their interests. We have a few people who are saying economic value and biodiversity, which is kind of both together. So we're generating quite a few responses, which is great. And yeah, I don't know how long to keep going, Fabio, but we'll leave it to you
Okay.
When you think it's ready to switch to the next question.
Yes, I think we have 7 participants typing. We have 51 responses so far. I'd give them another few seconds, maybe 1 minute, and then we'll move to the next question. I think that the composition of the responses is fairly clear as of now. So adding more probably would not shift the focus, even though I can see biodiversity is coming up a bit more.
Yeah, and local biodiversity as well as biodiversity. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna swap to the next question in 3 seconds. So you still have, well, maybe 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And next question is, when deciding which tree to plant, should you prefer native or introduced species?
Yeah, so go ahead, everyone, answer this one. It's a difficult question, but we're trying to just create some useful discussion from this session.
Yep. Okay, so we have 40 responses, and I think there's a clear indication what the people in the room are thinking. And you've heard both cases for native and introduced.
Yeah, and I'm guessing what we can say, the introduced is coming up a little, but I'm guessing this probably reflects the participant group in the meeting, perhaps more focused on ecology and restoration. But interestingly, on the previous question, livelihoods and purpose was very important. So we have to kind of factor that into understanding this answer as well, in terms of what that would mean for native tree species planting, in terms of livelihood development and things like that, rewards for ecosystem service payments, etc. Great.
I don't see the number going up fast anymore, and in any case, I think the overall result will be around 90 to 10%. So I think we can stop here with the poll, and I'm handing it back to you, Ian. Thanks.
Great. Thanks very much, Fabio, for doing that. So the participants have raised a number of questions, which is great. We only have a short time to answer those now, but just to say that after the hour, we'll go into an additional voluntary kind of section where we can discuss things further and answer some of those questions there. But I think I'd just like to raise a question with Paul first, if that's okay. And so, Paul, why do you think it is sometimes that we get this quite extreme polarization in views that sometimes holds about whether we should plant native or introduced tree species? That's a difficult question, directing it to Paul.
Thanks, Ian, for directing the difficult question to me. I think it's controversial because it's tied up with other things, and as everyone has said, purpose is sort of primary amongst those. If you're a farmer, for the reasons that we've seen, you really are going to choose an exotic species on the whole, because it can do all of the things that we've seen in the presentations from Chris and Elizabeth. Biodiversity is more of a public good that is shared, the effect that has on ecosystems and so on. But it's also worth saying that biodiversity doesn't vote, and biodiversity is not what wins elections or elects governments. So obviously, from a government perspective, you want to keep people happy, and people can't always, I think, see the advantages of biodiversity, and certainly, people who are struggling to make a living and so on. It's no surprise that that they want to see commercial species that they can make a living from being prioritized. So I think it's also tied up in land use and that competition, if you like, between people's livelihoods and land use, and then setting aside forests and biodiversity areas for biodiversity conservation, and all of the things that they provide, which are perhaps less tangible.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Thanks for trying to answer a difficult question. Also, a question for Chris that came up through the chat. And Chris, this is about you were talking about growing trees for products, as was Elizabeth. But in that work, what level of attention is paid to environmental service provision as well, in different ways. But just briefly, could you comment on that? Are people thinking about environmental service provision as well as products? Oh, you're on mute, Chris, by the way. Yeah, just on mute. Yeah,
Thanks,
that's it.
thanks, Ian. Good question. I would again come back to, I think it's my slide 6 or 7, where I say there are no sustainable species, there's sustainable management. And you don't choose a species because, for example, I see papers where people say, oh, we should choose this eucalypt instead of that eucalypt because it uses less water in some way. But you need to manage the plantation so that wood production is sustained over multiple short rotations, as we've seen, and so that environmental impacts are minimised. And a point I would make, it relates to what Paul was saying too, that if plantations are well managed, you can have a very big industry, including export industries of wood products, and only use a very small proportion of the land area in the country. And a lot of smallholders actually have a comparative advantage growing this commodity wood. So it's terrific poverty alleviation for them. There's the area that needs to be reforested or natural ecosystems needed to be established is tens of times bigger than what you need for a really successful in-country smallholder plantation industry. So I hope that puts it in perspective a bit. That you don't need to have tigers running around in eucalypt plantations. They can run around in the restored natural forests. I hope that comes across.
Great, thanks very much, Chris. And just a quick question for Wingate. And so Wingate, one of the questions that came up was, what type of alternative livelihoods are you providing to communities through this work on planting native tree species? If you could just give a short response on that.
Yes, we established indigenous tree nurseries for the communities, which they act as like commercial nurseries. So they sell the seedlings and also pay the community for tree planting around the sites. And when funds are available, we also involve other partners to bring projects such as beekeeping or whatever else that may come about in the likes of nature-based solutions. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Wingate. So we're almost at the end of this hour. So we thank the presenters for their answers, their presentations. Thank you everyone for contributing. What we're going to do now is in a few minutes, we're going to go into like an additional optional 30-minute discussion session to go into some of these questions in more depth. So participants, if you can stay online, please do, and we'll do that in a minute or two. For everyone now, we'd just like to see whether you've found this session useful. So we're just going to flash up a question that you can answer on that. So please just answer that question. That's great. And then while that's happening, we'd also just like to say that if you're interested in finding out more about the Quality Tree Seed Transformative Partnership Platform, we'll just put a link in the chat so that you can find out more about that. Yeah, and if you kind of sign up to that, you'll also find out information about up and coming webinars that will take place under the platform as well. So we're getting some responses on this, which is good. Just say what you think. We'll maybe leave this for another 20 seconds, and then we'll just go to the next question, which is just about, what do you think we should cover in these webinars? So Fabio, we'll let you make the switch when you think it's the right time between the questions.
Yes, I was counting 20 seconds, which I think are past by now, and I think the overall assessment of the session will not change dramatically if I change now the question. So let's go to the next one.
Yeah. Great. So this is just, topics that you think you'd like to cover under this platform for future webinars, especially connected to tree planting, how we do tree planting better, how we source tree planting materials, which is all connected with the project under which this platform operates. So just we'll give maybe a minute for people to do that.
One thing I can do, Ian, is I can leave this question open while you guys have the additional 30 minutes Q&A.
Okay.
So that people can type and we can then the TPP can then review the answers exposed. But I'll give it a minute on the screen still so that people can see what others are typing.
Yeah, great. So we'll keep that question on screen. So just to say, if you need to drop out now, please do as participants. It's been great to have you. If you can stay, please stay for the next half hour and we'll continue the discussion. But of course, we understand that people sometimes have limited time. If you are dropping out, thanks for attending and we'll hope to see you again. If you're staying, we'll start this optional 30-minute session just by addressing some more questions to the speakers. What we'll do is we'll use a couple of set questions that we've thought about already, and then we'll go back to the questions that have been raised by participants as we've gone along. So I hope that's okay. So I think first, so just to start this next bit of the meeting, just for the next half hour, going to ask Paul this question. So Paul, I think we have some ideas from the session already, but what do you think? Is it possible to reach a convergent view on when and where it's appropriate to plant native or introduced exotic tree species? Are we able to come to a convergent view on what's appropriate? Do you think that's possible, Paul? Paul?
He needs to unmute.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Go ahead, Paul.
No, I think Paul is on mute and has switched off his camera, so might have left briefly the conversation.
Well,
so you want to move to somebody else right now?
Yeah, well, we'll maybe address that question.
Oh, he's back. He's back. He's back.
Okay.
He's back. I can see him.
Paul, we have a question for you. I don't know if you were able to hear it, but I'll just repeat it just in case. But Paul, we wanted to ask you, do you think it's possible to reach a convergent view on when and where it's appropriate to plant native or introduced tree species? Is it possible to come to some kind of convergent view on that? And I think we've touched on it a bit already, but maybe if you could say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, as I said, I think that's to do with land use planning. It's to do obviously with agreement with local communities and so on around areas that need to be restored. I think Wingate's example from Kilifi is a good one. What we do know is, and I think it is possible, as we're seeing sort of at a micro scale, to get benefits for everybody in this. So the scenario that Wingate described, where local people are part of value chains, producing, collecting seeds, producing seedlings of native species for restoration. That, of course, and planting trees and so on, that does rely on there being public money available to fund those initiatives. Because as Chris said in his talk, it's a different economic model from smallholder farming, where you're planting something to sell a product directly to a market. So the key thing here is for, I think, governments and others to create markets and the need for native species, because then that will create livelihood opportunities for people as well. And that's where we see, those two objectives converging. But that does require investment from government, who understand and of course have made these commitments that biodiversity is a public good.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. And I think, Paul, what you're speaking about, we can think of that relating to the particular project under which this webinar series is being done, which is about, how do we do native tree species planting better, where there is that aspect of markets, which in particular unique land use that our partner is working on. So maybe just to make that comment. Yeah, thank you, Paul, for that. So maybe a question to the group. We can see who wants to answer it. Maybe Chris can answer it. But Chris, if you think about the impacts of climate change on forestry, on tree planting, how do you think that affects what we do when we think about planting native or introduced tree species? Could you comment on that a little bit?
Yeah,
We know that.
sure.
Go
Yeah.
ahead, Chris. Yeah.
Sure, Ian. Yeah, that's really interesting. And the use of exotics as I've tried to show in smallholder forestry, they're being grown on really quite short rotations, so that reduces the sort of duration of the risk that a grower in a typhoon-prone area in parts of Africa or Southeast Asia, they probably only got a vulnerable period of about 2 years. So up to a year or so, the trees will survive the typhoon. If the stand gets smashed up between years 2 and 4, they might lose everything, but after 4, they can salvage log it and get most of their money. So it's much less risky in the sense of a biophysical enterprise than trying to re-establish a native forest community with all its ecosystem that you want to persist for 50 years and sequester carbon and have biodiversity and so on. So it's very different. I haven't, in my talk, I didn't address at all the idea of planting exotic species in the context of forest restoration. And I'm not entirely opposed to that, but obviously mostly it should be native species. But I think there's a case for sometimes using exotics as a framework species when you have to capture a difficult site like a ex-mining land. And my slide 20, I'm not sure if people can see that, is an example in Vietnam where we've been spending 20 years of research led by Rod Griffin to develop seedless acacia hybrid clones, which could be used in wetter areas to capture sites and pump them up for people to underplant with native species and harvest after 5 years enough wood to pay for the enterprise. So this is a bit of this convergence thing where the two, exotics and indigenous, can work hand in hand towards ecosystem restoration and helping to create the income that can push ecosystem restoration along. But obviously, if you had a native species that's a good pioneer, you'd probably go for that rather than having to go to all the trouble of bringing in an exotic.
Thanks, Chris. That's great. Thanks for answering. So now a question for Elizabeth. I hope Elizabeth is still online. But so a question for Elizabeth would be, so and sorry, Elizabeth, that I cut you short, slightly short on your presentation. But so Elizabeth, this is a question about the financial benefits from exotic tree planting. Obviously, in your work, you're thinking about the product, the wood product. are you able to factor in things like carbon credits into your work, or is that something that can be considered, or is it very much purely the commercial value of the wood that you're thinking about? So Elizabeth, if you're there, could you answer that question?
Sure thing. Here I am. And that's totally okay. So we do consider carbon credits in our work. I think one of the main reasons as to why we do so is because of government. So let's say the Tanzanian government, the Ugandan government, and definitely the Kenyan government. I believe some of our work has even looked at presenting, or rather working with external bodies to present the case for, again, commercial forestry using exotic trees, and adding on the fact of carbon credits as well, as a revenue generating, or rather another revenue stream in the portfolio. I guess I could also mention some of our work right now, or it hasn't really kicked off just yet, is a payment system that looks at, or rather a payment platform that looks to pay farmers who not only grow trees, but also some agricultural products for the carbon credits that they generate. So yeah, we are definitely, or rather that is in our strategy, or rather in our conversations when we're talking about commercial forestry.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Great. So here's also a question for the panel more widely, and anybody who can answer the question. Do you think this idea of stacking carbon credits with kind of biodiversity credits has any potential for supporting native tree species planting? The idea that the two could be stacked together. Will it ever be enough to make a difference behaviorally in terms of what type of tree a grower would plant? That's a pretty hard question, but I don't know if anyone can take that one on. Maybe Paul would have a view.
Can you rephrase that? What do you mean by stacked?
That idea of combining biodiversity credits with carbon credits together in ecosystem service payment. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've been involved quite a lot in the biodiversity credit discussions, and one of the challenges there is coming up with common metrics for biodiversity, and it's also tied up with the idea of offsetting biodiversity, which I think in the conservation world is highly controversial because it requires a judgment around equivalency. So, in other words, if you cause the extinction or the destruction of one species in one place, is it equivalent to to improve the status of a different species in a different place? So that's been one of the impediments. Having said that, I do think that it is possible to show biodiversity uplift in many ways, and that it should be possible to package that. The challenge is showing the difference between the baseline and the interventions that are made and attributing those interventions. So it is complicated and more complicated than carbon, because carbon is a single metric. It's basically biomass, an equivalent to carbon that you're putting in the ground or you're sequestering, and that's offset against emissions, which are easily measurable. We have been involved in putting together. I mean, as we're talking about trees, we worked with the University College of London to put a package together for biodiversity credits that was about planting and recovering native tree species. And in that situation, you don't need to measure the package of biodiversity. You can just measure how many trees were there in the first place and how many have you planted and have established. Because, as I said in my talk, there's a massive knock-on for other biodiversity. You don't need to count all those birds, those mammals, those insects, those lichens and fungi and so on. You know that if you plant, let's say, a European oak, that there are 4,000 other species I'm talking about in Europe, that rely on that oak in their life cycle. So the only thing you need to count is how many trees were there at the beginning and how many trees are there now that you are responsible for. So and we're seeing some similar things come with mammals, with lemurs, and and also with white rhino and black rhino. So I do think, it is going to be possible to package up biodiversity into easily measurable units. But there are a lot of complexities, as I say, around some of the other issues around offsets and so on.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Thanks a lot. So I think what we'd like to do at this stage, as we said at the start, we'd just like to, for the participants who are still online, if you would like to ask a question directly, verbally, to the speakers, put your hand up, put your Zoom hand up, and then we can, you can join and on microphone and ask a question. So we'll kind of monitor if anyone is raising their hands to do that. Uh, and if anyone does raise their hands, we'll ask you to give your question. I'm not seeing anybody at the moment, but that might just be me. If there is anyone, please do raise your hand,
There's
and
one.
Fikayo will. Oh,
There's
okay.
one. Isao Kusindo.
Okay, so would you like to ask your question directly?
Yeah, so thank you. My name is Isao Kisendo. Actually, I'm a lecturer on GIS and remote sensing, applied to forest management on Faculty of Agrarian Science in Wambo, Angola. And I'm co-supervisor of 3 students that are also took part on this meeting. So we want to know how we can be more involved on this organization. If you have like a research program, schedule of your events, so we can join. Yeah, this is what I want to say now. I don't have a specific question about the presentation. That was very good. So I only want to know how to join. And
Okay.
please, if it's possible, just consider my chat. Thank you.
Great. Well, Isa, I think we just need to mute, just mute Isa. That's it. Yeah. So Isa, just to address your question about what's going on under the initiative. So Fikayo posted a link in the chat about the initiative. So just have a look at that web link. It was maybe Fikayo, you could just repost that link to the Quality Tree Seed Transformative. Yes, you've just done that. So thank you. It's just been reposted. So just follow that link, and that will explain a bit more about the initiative. And as we plan new events, further events, they'll also get posted there as well. So just follow up on that, have a look on that. So hopefully that addresses that question, Isao. Good to have you with us. Any other questions from the group? Fikayo will monitor that, but just as we are waiting to see if anything comes up, I'm just going to ask the presenters, the speakers, for those that presented on native tree species, so that's Wingate and Paul. What single intervention from a practical or a policy perspective do you think would allow us to do native tree species planting better? So that question is to Paul and Wingate. You can both, or one of you can answer. Please go ahead.
I can maybe go first, and then Wingate. I think that for me it is it's policy, which is is critical here. I think governments need to follow up on the pledges that they've made for restoration and recovery of biodiversity. And we have 200 governments have signed up to the Convention on Biological Diversity and ratified that. So they need to put legislation in place, and they need to spend public money to create that virtuous circle that we've talked about, where it is financially, economically worthwhile for people to grow, restore, plant native species. So it's that policy intervention that for me is the most important thing that can be done.
Yeah. Okay, Paul. And Wingate, did you want to add anything on that, or?
No, I totally agree with Paul.
Yeah. So addressing policy issues are crucial. And so the same question, but for introduced exotic tree species to Elizabeth and to Chris. What single intervention from a practical or a policy perspective do you think would allow us to do exotic introduced tree species planting better? So Chris or Elizabeth, any suggestions?
I'll kick off.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah. I guess a combination of governments and local industry development should get together, and exotics shouldn't be promoted above a level where there's going to be markets for the wood that are produced by the exotic plantings. So they shouldn't be pressed into service of forest restoration. But there's a role, a private sector, public sector role, particularly in Africa, where consumption of commercial wood products is so much lower than the rest of the world. And as economies grow and people get wealthier in Africa, they're going to need a lot of wood products. So some sort of coordination of supply and demand, if you like. The two things kind of go in lockstep, and there needs to be recognition that you don't go around planting eucalypts or some other exotic just for the hell of it. You're growing them as part of a sort of livelihood improvement, poverty alleviation, economic development strategy. And I'd like to see most of the future growing being done by smallholder growers on their own land rather than trying to run it through state forests and farms and so on. I think when it's done well, it's terrific. It can, you look at central Vietnam, which was about the poorest region in the entire planet in the late 1980s after the war, and now it's really flourishing, and a lot of that's due to commercial plantation forestry with, in their case, exotic species. And I would say also that they're very pragmatic people. If they'd found indigenous species that grew as well as the exotics, they would have used them rather than the exotics.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And Elizabeth, did you want to add anything on, what would be the most important interventions to do it better?
Yeah, sure. Sure thing, thank you. I think just two things. It was mentioned before by Chris, but first and foremost, site species matching tools. So I think there was a comment where I think some trees were planted, but exotic trees were planted, but they died. I think the point here is if policy could also include, growers of trees to use site species matching tools. This will avoid things like, or rather prevent or mitigate the risk of crop failure, etc. Just because, again, the tool will tell you about what you should plant and where. I think the last thing is improved genetics. Of course, it's a lot of research being done when it comes to exotic genetics. There's a couple of things that was done with another organization that we used to be under, FDT in Tanzania, that just shows, or rather presents the case for improved genetics with higher yields and higher productivity for farmers. So I think those two key things are really important to also include.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Elizabeth. I think we have another question from the group, from the participant group. So Prasad, I think you had raised your hand. So Prasad, did you want to ask your question, raise your question to the speakers. Go ahead.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Paul and Chris and others. It was enlightening presentation by all of you. It was good, but I think in the classifying of trees between introduced and natives, we left out a very important category of naturalized trees, because that's where most of the value has gotten captured in the last 2 or 3 centuries during the colonialism and the movement of fruit trees from one place to other place. I think that's important, that we shouldn't miss on the naturalized trees, because we don't get a lot of criticism on naturalized trees as we do get for the other type of trees which are recent introduction to the other continents. That's what I think. The third category was extremely important to have talked about, and that's the naturalized trees. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Prasad. I just wanted to see any feedback from the speakers on that, or
Yeah, I can
any
respond, Ian.
comments?
Yeah, no argument from me on that. I think naturalized species that have been adopted by other organisms in their life cycles and so on, and provided those naturalized species are not destructive and displaying, in other words, they're occupying an ecological niche, and they give as much as they take in it. I think that's absolutely right. And actually, we have here in the United Kingdom a big debate around what are native trees and which ones are not. Depends on who you ask, because most of them will have come in the last 10,000 years after the Ice Age, anyway. So yeah, I think it's a very valid point.
I think FAO defines the limit as 250 years in one of the documents. So maybe, I mean, that's like a very, very arbitrary years, but we can always talk about why should that year be considered as one.
Yeah, I mean, in the UK, many were brought in by the Romans, which are still here, and one of the challenges that we have with them is that some of them are genetically not very diverse. They will have come from a single grove, from mainland Europe and so on. But yeah, I think they're at home. They've been here 2,000 years.
Great. Thank you, Prasad, for the question. Thanks, Paul, for chipping in to answer. So we are coming to the end of the webinar now. We're sorry that there are a lot of questions that we haven't answered, but we have noted them, and we'll be considering them in our work, and also in future webinars going forward. So we hope that this webinar has been useful for us in terms of trying to reach a bit more of a shared understanding of when to plant native and introduced tree species, and perhaps some of the trade-offs that may be involved, and also where key interventions are needed. If you'd like to refer to it, going forward, the webinar has been recorded, and so it will be placed online. You could just search for the webinar title. I think that would find it. And so also to note that if you would like to influence what we do with the platform going forward, there is a survey that you can complete, and so we'll just get Fikayo to post the link to that survey in the chat, so that you can follow that link if you want to, and it'll ask you some questions about what should be covered under the platform. We'd also just like to ask a final question to you about whether this little extra session has been useful, this extra discussion. And so Fabio will post a question online about that you can complete and say whether you think it's useful or not. So we thank. So I hope I haven't missed anything. So organisers, if I've missed something, just please chip in. But if not, we're very grateful to the speakers for this webinar, to Paul, Elizabeth, Wingate, and Chris. Thank you for contributing and giving your time. thanks to all the participants for taking part as well. Keep a lookout for future events, and we'll hope to see you again. So I think that concludes the seminar. Feel free to drop out when you want to. Fikayo, I don't know if you were able to point the link and to post the link to the survey on the TPP, but that would be good if possible.
Ian, just a
Yes.
comment from my side. I think Fikayo already posted it on the chat just a second ago.
And he's posted it just now. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. And just to say that I'll leave this poll on alive for the next couple of hours, so people can still comment on it if they have it on on their mobile phone or on the computer. So, but it's been a really, really informative and wonderful webinar. So congratulations also from my side and to everybody.
Great. Thank you, Fabio.
Thanks,
and yes, please. Thank you, Thank you, everyone. Please feel free just to drop out now, and the organisers will end the meeting as well. So thank you all, and bye bye.